surge of hope that I've been getting. It's ever since I went to the Farm to Cafeteria Conference in Vermont, just out of curiosity, anyone here was there? It was at the University of Vermont this past August. And it was such a gathering of your colleagues, your unindicted co-conspirators out there, people who are working to improve food in schools, in daycare, in healthcare setting, and to build bridges between farms and agriculture and rural communities and children and adults in need in this country. So you've got a lot of company, and I think it's reasonable to expect that the graduates of a premier food studies program like this are going to provide lots of leadership for these movements. Are you getting feedback? It's all right? Okay. So thank you very much to all of you and to Allison and Min, and then some special little thanks to Kelsey and Kelsey from the Environmental Charter School and the folks from Springboard Kitchen for very stimulating conversation Tuesday night, and to Food Bank folks for including me in their farm stand celebration. I mentioned to Alice that I'm going back to the East Coast, to Brooklyn, with two terrific examples of the kinds of programs that I think we need to see more of and to grow. So that's an exciting game for me. I want to thank Tanya, even though she couldn't be here, for the chauffeur service and the little extra tour around, is it Barnett? Braddock, where I did see the garden that one of your students has helped with. To Erin for arranging the tennis for my husband, to Kate for the fit. Anyway, this has been a wonderful welcome. Now I'm going to warm up my voice by reading to you something from one of my favorite writers, and this is a little piece from MFK Fisher. People ask me, why do you write about food and eating and drinking? Why don't you write about the struggle for power and security and about love the way others do? They ask it accusingly, as if I were somehow unfaithful to the honor of my craft. The easiest answer is to say that, like most other humans, I am hungry. But there is more than that. It seems to me that our three basic needs for food and security and love are so mixed and mingled and entwined that we cannot straightly think of one without the others. So it happens that when I write of hunger, I am really writing about love and the hunger for it, and warmth and richness and fine reality of hunger satisfied, and it is all one. There is food in the bowl, and more often than not, because of what honesty I had, there is nourishment in the heart to feed the wilder, more insistent hungers. We must eat, if in the face of that dread fact, we can find other nourishment and tolerance and compassion for it, will be no less full of human dignity. There is a communion of more than our bodies when bread is broken and wine is drunk. And that is my answer when people ask me, why do you write about hunger and not wars or love? I'm not just indulging myself in channeling MFK Fisher, and I'll come back to this passage a little later in the talk and explain why I get to read it. But this fall, several groups have asked me to help them mark anniversaries. And so I've done some looking backward. One was the 30th anniversary of the formation of the Hunger Action Network of New York State, that we call HANNIES, which was formed in 1982. And then another, just on my way here, I stopped at Villanova, where the Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week was started actually in the mid-1970s. So in both these cases, it was kind of, well, how far have we come? What have we accomplished? Or in the election season, you've always got people asking, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? So this is, are hungry and homeless people in the United States better off than they were 30 years ago? And this is what I mean about the bad news, because the news was overwhelmingly bad. When Hunger Action Network was started in 1982, the poverty rate was 15%. This year, the poverty rate was 15%. Actually, if you look at the American Community Survey figures, it's actually higher, 15.5, it's 15.9, very close to its historic high since the war on poverty. It hasn't been a steady. It got down as low as 11.1 at one point. But we don't have good news to present. And of course, as the population has grown, every percentage point means another 3 million people. Okay, so another 3 million people get to cope with the pain and exclusion and marginalization and indignities associated with poverty. So in terms of numbers of poor people, there are 42.6 million people in the United States living below the official federal poverty line. Now, I'm not going to do my whole thing about deconstructing the poverty line. It's in Sweet Charity. You can go read it if you want, but I am going to remind you that if we use the assumptions, and the current poverty line is $23,021 for a family of four. If your income, if you're a household of four and your income is over $23,021, you're not one of the 42.6 million officially poor people. There are obviously different thresholds for different family sizes, but if you go back to the assumptions on which the poverty line is based and you break it down, it comes out to $1.76 a meal. If you can, by allocating a third of your income for food, and hardly anybody can do that anymore, but that's what people were doing in the 50s when the roots of this measure were established. If by allocating a full third of your income to food, you can afford more than $1.76 a meal, 3 meals a day, no snacks, then you're not one of those officially poor, those 42.6 million officially poor. And for poor people, the poverty line is a ceiling, not a floor. Okay, there's no guarantee because you're poor that you've got that. And that is one of the things that did shock me in this looking back, is that the percentage of people living below half the poverty line, it's what we could call deep poverty, below half the threshold for their family size, has grown substantially since the late 70s or early 80s. In 1975, 3.7% of the American population was living in that deep poverty. It's now up to 6.6. So, I mean, that's shocking. That's an outrageous figure. We know a lot more about poverty than we did in the mid-70s or even the early 80s, and one of the things we know is that the population experiencing poverty is not a static group, but in fact people move in and out of what social scientists call spells. I'm having a spell of poverty. And in fact, and this was a figure that really woke me up, most Americans, 51.4%, will live in official poverty at some point before age 65. So this is a condition that is affecting more and more of our society. Well, given those numbers, you're probably not surprised to hear that the food insecurity numbers are also very, very high. 50.1 million people in the United States in the most recent household food security study lived in households that experienced food security. That's about 1 out of every 7. In this land of plenty, Pennsylvania is not doing much better, 12.5% of Pennsylvanians, so about 1 out of every 8. And sadly, more than 20% of households with children suffered from food insecurity. So, have we made any progress since, the mid-70s or the early 80s on food insecurity? Well, I have to tell you, we can't say exactly because we didn't collect that data. But this is not an insignificant thing in and of itself. Back in the years of the Great Depression, we didn't collect data on unemployment. It took a national crisis of unemployment to get us to invest in a system to track it. And so we've had enough of a crisis with food access in the United States that we do have a widely respected and fairly reliable number. I'm not going to say accurate, but reliable is, if I use this yardstick to measure you and then somebody else uses the yardstick to measure you, we'll both get the same measurement. Whether it's an accurate measurement or not depends on how good the yardstick is. This collecting of data and reporting it makes it more difficult for the people I think of as hunger deniers, the people who just can't acknowledge that people go hungry in the United States. But one other big difference in the poverty, food, and hunger